to the launch of our new joint webinar series, Powering Forward, which is exploring some of the challenges facing the clean energy economy in the United States at this unique time and the vital role of our sectors in our future economic recovery. Each of these episodes we are producing collaboratively with partners working to advance clean energy, demonstrating that together we can power forward through this crisis to emerge as a stronger, more resilient America. I want to just a few quick housekeeping notes. I would urge everyone to please keep your lines muted to avoid background noise. Additionally, we are recording this webinar and we will disseminate a recording to all the participants at the conclusion of the webinar. And I'm going to start by turning it over. Well, first we're going to just briefly go through the agenda. We're going to have brief welcoming remarks from Lisa Jacobson, the President of the Business Council for Sustainable Energy. I am Lynn Abramson, President of the Clean Energy Business Network. We'll also hear from David Terry, who is Executive Director of the National Association of State Energy Officials, which is our co-host for today's webinar. Additionally, we are delighted to be joined today by Camille Crane, who is the Section Chief for the BRIC program, the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program at FEMA, who is going to give the bulk of our remarks. Then we're going to hear state and industry respondents, starting with Ben Bolton and Megan Levy, who are respectively from Tennessee and Wisconsin energy offices and are co-chairs of the NASIO Energy Security Committee. And we're going to give some of the state perspectives on implementation of the BRIC program. And then finally, we'll hear from Anna Pavlova and Manny Perrotin, respectively from Schneider Electric and CDM Smith, which are BCSE and CEBN member companies that will give the industry perspective. So with that, I'm thrilled to turn it over to Lisa to give some brief welcome remarks from BCSE.
Be doing with the Clean Energy Business Network. The Business Council for Sustainable Energy is a trade association based in Washington, D.C. We represent the broad spectrum of U.S. energy interests, but our primary sector focus is energy efficiency, natural gas, and renewable energy. We advocate for policies at the state, national, and international levels, and our focus is to bring together a portfolio of affordable, reliable, and clean energy technology products and services to solve many of the challenges we face, whether that be in the energy and infrastructure arena or environmental issues like enhanced resilience and air quality and greenhouse gas reduction. So we're very pleased to be having the opportunity to help convene this webinar today, because one of the more important areas of our work in the past several years is to help communities make investments to enhance their resilience, and ideally to do it in whether it be floods, wildfires, droughts, wind, hurricanes. We have unfortunately experienced many events in the past several years, and we are eager to see how public-private partnerships can help enhance our buildings, enhance other critical facilities, and help modernize our energy infrastructure. And if I could, I'd just ask you to please advance the slides. So this is a snapshot of the BCSE's members. We are both companies and trade associations, again, primarily in energy efficiency, natural gas, and renewable energy. You can go one more, please. One of the areas that's tied to our focus on resilience is a product we release each year called the Sustainable Energy in America Fact Book. This is a report that is commissioned by the BCSE and authored by Bloomberg New Energy Finance. We are in our 8th year, and we released our most recent issue in February of this year. And we look at a broad range of energy data, and really it tracks the state of play of U.S. energy markets broadly. In the last several years, we have been tracking more data as it relates to resilient infrastructure and also the challenges and the expense that state, local, and federal governments have to take on after a unexpected event. So there's some good resilience-related data in here, and I encourage you to take a look at it. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, the BCSE has made resilience a really important cross-cutting strategic issue for the coalition, and we've undertaken a number of activities in this area, including a Readiness for Resilience project that we were pleased to be a partner on with NASIO that supported communities in Texas and Puerto Rico with resilience planning after the 2017 hurricanes. We also have had a multi-year Thought Leaders series, and I would characterize this discussion today as a perfect fit for that kind of venue and convening that we have offered. We also have written papers, and we've done education and advocacy on particular programs. And the Disaster Recovery and Reform Act that was enacted in 2018, which helped bring this BRIC program forward, was something BCSE, NASIO, CEBN, and many of our members and partners were a part of. So being where we are today in the process is really exciting. Next slide, please. So with that, I'm very pleased to turn it back to our MC today, the president of the Clean Energy Business Network, Lynn Abramson.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Lisa. The Clean Energy Business Network is a subsidiary of the Business Council for Sustainable Energy, and we serve as the small business voice for the clean energy economy. So whereas the Business Council represents some of the major industry corporations, utilities, and trade associations in this sector, we represent primarily small and mid-sized companies present across the entire clean energy landscape. And we work to serve these small businesses in 3 areas, including providing policy resources and support to help them navigate policy opportunities that impact their market. We also provide market and technology education, both externally facing to stakeholders as well as internally facing to promote collaboration within the industry. And then finally, we provide business development and assistance in the form of aggregated resources and opportunities to forge connections across the clean energy landscape, such as through our funding database and our membership directory. We have, actually, I think we've reached close to 3,600 business leaders across all 50 states and close to 60 premium dues-paying members who have access to our business development resources. And as you can see, they represent a very broad section of technologies. We are pleased to have a Faces Behind the Facts program, which is a complement to the Sustainable Energy in America fact book that Lisa discussed. And we profile business leaders across this industry. So we launched the 2020 fact book in February, concurrent with the release of the fact book, and we are profiling business leaders throughout the year. So please visit our website and feel free to submit an application if you'd like to be profiled. Okay, with that, I would like to turn it over to David Terry to tell us a little bit more about NASIO.
Thank you, Lynn. It's really terrific to be co-hosting today's webinar with you. A big thanks to the Business Council, Lisa Jacobson, and Lynn and the CBN organization. They have been important strategic partners for NASIO in many of the states and really reflect the public-private approach that we take to solving many of the energy challenges that we have and that we work on with our members. NASIO is the only nonprofit organization that includes membership from all 56 state and territory governor designated energy directors and their offices, over 3,000 energy professionals across the country. We work on federal policy issues, but also spend really the primary amount of our time helping to coordinate across the state, share best practices in a range of areas covering every energy sector and end-use sector, from buildings to grid, vehicles. But first and foremost, the organization was founded, as were the energy offices, around energy security and resilience. So it has been a core function of ours for many, many years. Next slide, please. The activities of the energy offices are quite varied. Most have a core resilience or energy security function. They may co-lead or lead that. They cover all fuel types and regulated and unregulated energy resources, spend a great deal of time on efficiency and renewable and distributed energy and storage options that may add to resilience and economic development and provide emissions and environmental benefits, and work in sectoral areas such as building efficiency, manufacturing efficiency, advanced transportation technologies. Most of these have some kind of economic development link. The energy directors and offices generally report to their governors. Governors beyond security and resilience and health and safety issues always have economic development as a priority naturally, but it's particularly true now when you think about the crisis that we're facing with COVID, not only the health crisis, but the economic crisis to come and returning to work. For the sake of moving on to our presenters, we have a great lineup today. I'll keep it brief, but I did want to spend just a moment to reinforce a few things that Lisa and Lynn mentioned. One, NASIO, like BCSE, has been working in this space for several years of trying to support and promote the kind of pre-disaster mitigation and resilience activities that we saw come out of the Disaster Recovery and Reform Act. Across both energy infrastructure, but also the built environment, mission critical facilities, et cetera. There are many components to that: building energy codes, the resilience of infrastructure, storage, a whole variety of issues, and working together with the energy offices and the state emergency management agencies and our private sector and federal partners is how we move this forward in our view. And I just want to thank our colleagues at FEMA, particularly Camille, who will be presenting in a few moments, but also Catherine Fox, her colleague, who presented at the NASIO conference in February and really delivered some exceptional information and help to our members. I also just wanted to give a quick shout out to both Ben Bolton of Tennessee and Megan Levy of Wisconsin, our co-chairs of our Energy Security Committee, who have given generously of their time. They are experts in their areas and have literally taught and shared what they've known in a really generous way with states across the country, and we're glad to have them here. And lastly, just a quick shout out to our Campbell Delahoyd of the NASIO staff, who has brought this work together with Ben and Megan that we do. So I'll pause there so we can move on to our presenters, and thank you again for joining us.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, and really pleased to co-host this webinar with you. And now we're delighted to be hearing from Camille Crane, who's going to tell us more about the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program.
Thank you, Lynn. And let me start with giving a big thank you to the Business Council for Sustainable Energy, the Clean Energy Business Network, and NASIO for allowing us to come on your first webinars of this new series today. We're very excited about the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities grant program that we've been given the opportunity to build and implement. And we have made some major steps in the last couple of weeks in the development of our program. So we have a brand new slide deck that I get to premiere today for you all. So let's get started because there's a lot of content and not a lot of time. So can I get the next slide, please? So here's a kind of list of what we want to try to cover today for you all. And this includes going over what the BRIC program is, what is going on with the policy, which is out for public comment right now, where we are in our timeline, how funding gets brought about, and then what are we looking for in BRIC, as well as where are we in the process of developing and how that development has come about. Next slide. So you might be asking, if you don't know, what is the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Grant Program? We are a new hazard mitigation grant program that was brought about by the Disaster Recovery Reform Act of 2018. It authorized FEMA to develop a new pre-disaster mitigation grant program. We've had a pre-disaster mitigation grant program since 2002, and we had a large opportunity to build a new grant program, which isn't something you get to do every day. So over the past year, we've taken some time to really think through what we wanted that program to be. So what you see on this slide here is kind of the first work that happened in BRIC. And this was brought about by the senior leaders of FEMA, getting together, listening to stakeholder feedback, and figuring out, with this opportunity to have a new program, what exactly did we want to do? And I always like to present these guiding principles first, because all the work we've done since in developing the policy and in developing the program mechanics stem from these guiding principles. So first, we really think important supporting community capability and capacity building. We take very intentional the name of our program, which is Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities. And we believe that supporting communities' capacity and capability as it relates to mitigation and resiliency is vital. We want to encourage and enable innovation. So that is something that a lot of people have asked me, well, what do you mean by that? One thing is, what we always want to be open to pushing what is the next thing that we can do, either in the mitigation project space or in how projects are brought together, maybe with partnership. One thing I always talk about here is we want to meet communities where they are. So for example, I'm from Hopkinsville, Kentucky, but I recently moved from Dallas, Texas. So what's innovative in Hopkinsville, Kentucky may look different than what is innovative in Dallas, Texas, but we want to encourage that innovation for where that community is. We want to promote partnerships. We've always had partnerships in our program, but we're trying to put some more intention in that. We believe that to be successful in increasing resiliency in your community, you're going to have successful partnerships to do that. We know the vast majority of infrastructure in America is owned by the private sector. And so that is another reason to really push the promotion of partnerships. We want to enable large infrastructure projects. So hopefully with increased dollars that we'll have in the program, we can also increase the size of the project work we do. We want to maintain flexibility. And that's because, and I'll talk a minute about how funding is derived for the program, but we could have varying amounts of money from year to year. We also want to be able to improve from year to year. So looking at how best practices, where did we have gaps from the first year, the second year to third year, and being able to correct or add on to the program as we see those. And the sixth one is we want to provide consistency. The program that we are replacing, the PDM or Pre-Disaster Mitigation Grant Program, that's been around since 2002, was a congressionally appropriated program, which means every year there was a chance the money would not go into the program. So it was an uncertainty from year to year. And the way that BRIC is being funded and structured, it removes that uncertainty with a dedicated source of funding for BRIC. So with that, we have some consistency. And of course, the right side of the slide, everything we do wants to support there. We do support the FEMA strategic plan. This strategic plan has three key components. The first one is to build a culture of preparedness. And within that, it talks about increasing the investment to build a resilient nation. And so we are part of that effort. We want to ready the nation for catastrophic disasters. And we hope to do that with the project work we will fund and reduce the complexity of FEMA. Anytime you're designing a program, you want to make sure you're not trying to overcomplicate the process. So as we have designed the mechanics and elements of the program, we have taken that into consideration. This basically the applicant experience in applying. Next slide, please. So just as more background for the legislation, if you're interested in going and looking this up, BRIC is actually listed in the Disaster Recovery Reform Act as Section 1234. So basically there's a couple paragraphs in there that authorize us and tell us kind of what the tenets of the program will be. And it amends Section 203 of the Stafford Act, which was or is the pre-disaster mitigation language. It is funded by a 6% set aside. So the law says that the post-disaster grant funding that is spent through major disaster declarations, 6% will be set aside for the BRIC program. It talks about who the eligible applicants are. Those are state, territories, and federally recognized tribes, and that they must have a major disaster declaration within the past 7 years to be eligible. And we will replace, or we are replacing, the PDM program that just completed its last application cycle. So applications were due at the end of January, and FEMA is reviewing those applications now for funding determinations. Next slide, please. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what the policy is, or what's in the policy, because our big step in the program is that policy hit the Federal Register, was published in the Federal Register on April 10th, and is under public comment right now till May 11th. So some of the key elements you'll see in that policy are the funding mechanisms, so who's eligible and what they're eligible for. So you'll see that there is a state and territory allocation, and that is a set aside that is for each state and territory of a certain amount that is for capacity building projects as well as mitigation projects. We also have a tribal set aside. So we have because tribes do not get an allocation like states and territories do, we set aside a certain dollar amount for the federally recognized tribes in the nation for them to compete with amongst themselves for a certain dollar amount. And then the rest of the money will be spent on project competition. So by law, we have to spend at least 51% of our funding on a competitive process, and that competition will be for the mitigation projects. So that moves over to the uses of assistance. What can you apply for? We have a non-financial technical assistance piece, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. We also have the funding of capability and capacity building activities that can be funded within that state and territory allocation or tribal set aside. And that includes project types like we've typically funded, which is hazard mitigation planning, as well as new project types, such as building code projects, where we'll help a community either, if they haven't adopted a code, do the legwork to get that adoption, or to better their code from the one they currently have. Of course, mitigation projects are eligible, and then management costs to implement those projects. One thing we wanted to highlight here, because it's something we heard a lot from our stakeholders, is in the policy, we are looking a little differently at how we're doing pre-award cost. Pre-award costs are those that are eligible before an application is approved. So it isn't actually the implementation of the project, but it's doing the work to get the application ready, such as engineering, design, or maybe permitting. Typically in the past, you had to wait until the application period opened before you could start incurring those costs. Our policy that is out there for review right now, not formally approved, but it will be hopefully by the end of the summer. But basically, it's going to say that you can start incurring those costs before the opening of the application period. Of course, there's always a risk that if your project isn't funded, you don't recover those costs. But that was something we heard from our stakeholders that we wanted to try to help with, is giving a larger window to start incurring those costs. So that's just a small example in the policy of how we were trying to react to stakeholder comments. One thing I'll say also about the policy is that for you all that read it, you might say, well, this seems it doesn't give me all the details of the program. And that's purposeful. The policy is meant to be a framework that we can then flex or add the program details into from year to year, so we don't get into a cycle where we have to update the policy every year. The other supporting document that I'll talk about today is the Notice of Funding Opportunity, or NOFO, and that is currently in its concurrence process now. So I can't speak to a lot of the details, but that's where the detailed program elements will be from year to year. Next slide. So this is where you can find the draft policy. It is on regulations.gov. If you go to regulations.gov and you type in the search bar, building resilient infrastructure and communities, you'll see the policy come up and you can provide public comment there. Once again, it was published on April 10th and the comment period ends on May 11th. Next slide. So this is what we lovingly call our pizza tracker. And it is where we are currently in the development or the rollout of the program. So we were very happy to move to that third arrow on April 10th, where we're under the public comment. What happens next and what's been happening is the BRIC rollout and training. So webinars such as this one today are included in that. And I'll talk a little bit more about what we're going to do this summer. That Notice of Funding Opportunity, we have that in draft now within FEMA. So it is starting through its concurrence life. And we hope to have that published in August of 2020 with it to support the opening of an application period late September or October of 2020. Next, please. So we get a lot of questions about, once again, how is funding derived? And I went a little bit over that before, but this is what we lovingly call our piggy bank slide. So the way it happens is that a disaster is declared, and then 180 days after a disaster, an estimate is taken. And this is an estimate for all the different post-disaster grant programs. BRIC is funded out of a certain section of those post-disaster funding programs, such as public assistance and individual assistance, as well as some others. So when they do that 180-day or 6-month estimate, they also look in those categories at what is 6% of those monies. And 6% of the monies in those certain sections that fund BRIC goes into a separate BRIC account within the disaster relief fund. And so what we basically have is a rolling addition. So 180 days after every single disaster deck, more money is put into the account. And then our goal is every year we will then say, okay, here's how much money is in the account, and we'll offer that amount of money out. Next slide. So one of the things we get questions on a lot is, well, how is BRIC different than the existing pre-disaster mitigation grant program, if you've had experience with it? One is we have a different set of priorities. We'll talk a little bit about lifeline projects or lifelines and infrastructure. You can tell in the name of our program and in the name of the law, infrastructure is involved. We look more at building codes, or see if we're putting more importance on building codes. That also is represented in the law. I talked a little bit about the importance of partnership and shared responsibility and innovation. Second is we're being more intentional of how we build capability and capacity. So that comes with offering those new activity types, such as project scoping. We used to be called advanced assistance. Project scoping is the idea that if you know you need to have a project, a mitigation project, but you don't have the engineering, or you don't have the technical, environmental, BCA, benefit cost analysis work done, we can give you some seed money up front to help support that. The second thing is this in-person non-technical or non-financial technical assistance. That is something we've never had direct technical assistance in PDM that we're looking to have in BRIC. And then the third thing is one of the feedback we heard a lot was, well, can you tell me what a BRIC project would look like? So we are creating a mitigation action portfolio that is a part of other program support material that'll be delivered with the rollout of the program, hopefully in August. That will basically give you a 2-page snapshot of different project types and elements of the projects, kind of a taste, and then it also gives you some sources of where to go look for more information. But it gives you a taste of what different projects would look like and why they are good, either for BRIC or our other programs. The third thing we're trying to do is increase flexibility by reducing limitations, increasing caps, and then allowing that expansion of pre-award cost. Our fourth is looking to support that third piece of our FEMA strategic plan, streamlining our processes. So we are looking to have a new system that our grants will go through with what's called FEMA Grant Outcomes, or FEMA Go. We're looking at how we do project extensions and giving more responsibility to our regional offices. And we're also looking at maybe implementing phased projects. And so the idea of a phased project, similar to project scoping, but the difference is it actually funds both sections, the prep work or the last work to get a project ready, like the engineering, while it saves the money for actually the construction of the project. Next slide. So these are some elements of what we see as a good mitigation project. So if you're thinking about, what would make a project competitive, or what would FEMA want to see in an application for a project? And this is whether it's for BRIC or any of our other grant programs, because we have two other, the flood mitigation assistance and the hazard mitigation assistance grant program. These are things we like to see in the projects. First, they need to show risk reduction to natural hazards. So is there a clear representation by how you do this project? You will reduce risk to flooding, to an earthquake, to hurricane, whatever that natural disaster might be. The second is that you have a grant implementation approach that we have confidence that can be completed. So whatever that project is you're presenting to reduce risk, you have spelled out that you have the resources and the means to actually complete the work. And so we have confidence that if it approved, it could actually be finished. Once again, we're looking for innovation in both your project planning or implementation, but you're talking about how you're being innovative and how you're delivering the project or in the project being delivered. We always want to know about those populations impacted. Our projects in general offer risk reduction to people and property. So we want to know about the populations impacted, especially as it relates to socially vulnerable populations. We want to know about your partnerships and outreach. Partnerships are, once again, important. We know that they're going to be needed as we start dealing with more infrastructure type projects. And then how have you communicated this project out to your stakeholders? Future conditions. So that is that we're not only protecting the project to today, but what we think will be the future conditions, and that the project will protect to those levels. So if you looked at land use, population changes, sea level rise, or other conditions that might be happening in the future. And then, as I stated before, for BRIC, we're looking at having priorities for infrastructure and community lifelines projects. Next slide. At its heart, this is what makes a project eligible. We've had a lot of questions about, well, you funded these type of projects in the past. Are you still going to fund these type of projects? And the answer is yes. All the projects that have been eligible under our existing programs are still eligible. They may just not be the priority. On top of all that list of projects that you can find in 2015 Hazard Mitigation Assistance Guidance, additional project types that we're doing are the project scoping, as I described before, which is that upfront seed money to help get a project ready. Building code projects, that's something we haven't done in the past, but whether that is to help a community get a code or improve their code. DRA, a couple of different provisions added additional project types as well. Section 1205 added additional activities under wildfire and wind, and 1233 added earthquake early warning. What's important is in this blue box, at the end of the day, our projects must meet, these are kind of what are known as the 5 major components of eligibility for any of our projects under hazard mitigation assistance, which includes the BRIC program. 1, they must be cost effective. 2, they must reduce or eliminate risk and damages from future natural hazards. 3, they must be built to a code, to one of the last 2 consensus code if it's construction. 4th, it has to align with the community and the state's hazard mitigation plan. And then 5th, it must meet all environmental and historic preservation requirements. Next slide, please. So a little bit more about building codes, because this is something where when you look at the DRA language for what is now BRIC, it's not very long, but it specifically calls out that BRIC must be responsive to building codes. So the 2 things, like I've stated, that we have it kind of built into the program is 1, our projects must conform. We won't build anything that doesn't meet the last 2 building codes. And then the second thing is we will fund projects to help a community better their code or get code as it relates. And so the next slide kind of shows you the situation in the United States right now as it relates to building codes. Next slide, please. So on the left, you'll see that 26 states right now have not adopted either the 2015 or 2018 International Building Code or International Residential Code. Those are the ones that are in the darker gray scale. On top of that, if you look at the map on the right, we also are going to be intend to look at the building codes effectiveness grading schedule. And you have 15, and so what that is it's on a community level about and looks at different elements of how a community reacts or handles building codes. And so you can basically get a score between 1 and 10, with 1 being the best you can do and 10 being not the worst, but just less, let's say that. If you look at the states that are in dark there, those are the 15 states that don't have a community that has any kind of a BCSE score. And then 11 additional don't only have about 10% of their communities have a BCSE score of 1 through 5, which has been termed to be a disaster resistant BCSE score. Next slide, please. A little bit about lifelines. So I don't know if you might be familiar with FEMA's community lifelines. They were originally brought about in 2017 as the response to the hurricanes that year. And it was a way to focus our response activities around critical lifelines, and because these 7 that are presented below are looked at as these are critical services in a community that reflected the community's ability to be back operating and open. They've always been used in the past in that response framework, but we've looked at the fact that mitigation should also look at lifelines as well. Because if we can reduce risk to those lifelines, or we can add resiliency to those lifelines, then in a post-disaster setting, they should respond better. So we are looking at how we can incorporate lifelines into the program. And as you see, there are 7 different categories there, with energy, power, and fuel being front and center. Next, please. We wanted to give you just a couple examples of different projects so you can kind of see what we're talking about as I talk through those, what are examples of good projects. This first one is a underground water treatment plant that's in Hoboken, New Jersey. It does a couple of different things. It's in a largely urban setting. It combines a really good amount of water capability or handling, so it reduces flood levels. It mixes that in with green solutions by putting on top of this underground facility a park there in the middle. And it is a project that was funded out of PDM with $10 million of PDM money and $47 million of match. So it had really good examples of partnering. Next slide. This is a project that was not FEMA funded, but something I got to tour back in August, and it's with Blue Lake Rancheria in California. And basically through a different partnered network, and you can see some of their partners there listed, they created a microgrid system that combines solar power, battery backup generator that operates their facility there in Humboldt, California. What they basically can do is they have, for example, solar power on their gas station there at their facility, so that when the power goes out, they are the only gas station in their county that is still operational, which provides great services for the response community because they have opened that their microgrid not only protects their citizens, but they protect the community at large. They have the ability to store medicines for when power goes out, and they have the ability to convert their hotel to a hospital. And they are credited when power went out in October with saving 4 lives. Next slide, please. This is a flood project out of Colorado, and this one mixed in it looked at a nature-based solution to offer flood reduction, as well as adding co-benefits of putting in natural park settings for community use. Next slide, please. And this fourth one is just an example of a hospital in Missouri that looked at how they do backup power, and it was FEMA funded. Next slide, please. And for sake of time, I won't go a lot through this. I know these are going to be provided afterwards to you all, so it gives you more to read. But this is more information about project scoping and what that exactly is. That we are funding this an increased amount over PDM. It used to be known as advanced assistance, but it's the idea of that seed money to be able to help you put together an application, competitive application for either BRIC in future years or other grant programs. Next slide. So I wanted to give a plug for FEMA's benefit cost analysis. That is something, as I said, all of our projects must be shown to be cost effective. So you'll see a link down there where you can find out more. But this is basically, we have to have either, there's an actual module that has to be completed that shows we have a benefit cost ratio of at least 1. FEMA is always trying to increase the amount of pre-calculated benefits or ease our process or build efficiencies into the benefit cost analysis. So we do have pre-calculated benefits for certain project types, but to learn more, please visit their website there. Next slide, please. In technical assistance, that was something we heard a lot from in our stakeholder feedback, is that people need help to be successful. So a few things we've got going, I've already mentioned. The mitigation action portfolio, which will be the guidebook of project examples, which hopefully will be released this summer. The second thing is we will be doing a webinar series. In the month of July, we'll be doing, our goal is to do about 1 a week, each week in July, to introduce different topics of BRIC and talk about them in depth. And then once the NOFO is released, move over to doing tactical NOFO webinars on a pretty continuous basis to get everybody prepped and understanding of what all the details of the NOFO to support the opening of the application period. Next, please. Partnerships, I've talked about those, important. We have been very blessed with the BRIC program that we have a lot of interest from our other federal agencies, the private sector, and other non-governmental organizations. And we want to be able to harness that at both the national and the local levels. So we're looking at building a partnership framework. We're in process for that. We have people that want to champion our program. So that's such as the Business Council for Sustainable Energy is helping us amplify our message by Nazio and you all putting on the webinar today. I can reach partners that are potential applicants I don't normally reach. We are looking at some partners that want to offer technical services or service providers, and the other ones that want to be connectors, potentially with funding. So that's something we're in process right now, and we want to help communities do as well. Next slide. At the end of the day, we know BRIC is not enough funding to fix the infrastructure of America. So we always want to give a call out to other grant programs as well that are available within FEMA. We are one of 3 that are in the Hazard Mitigation Assistance division. So we have the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, the Flood Mitigation Assistance Program, as well as our public assistance has 406 mitigation. I know that there's other grant programs that are available in other federal agencies that also have a mission in resiliency, including NOAA, Corps, HUD, Department of Energy, and Department of Transportation, as well as there's other funding within states themselves that may not have federal funding tied to it. So we always want to be mindful of the portfolio funding that's available to help with resiliency. Next slide, please. So very quickly, we wanted to make sure this was the summer of 2019 that we didn't create this new grant program in a vacuum. So what we did is a series of in-person, virtual, and virtual engagements, as well as we stood up an email box. That generated the largest response FEMA ever received in feedback, with over 5,000 non-attributable individual comments and 75 different agency letters. We spent a few months and some PhD students going through all those and have created the summary of stakeholder feedback that is available on the BRIC website. It's a 78-page document that talks about all the trends we saw over those 5,000 plus comments. It does have a 4-page summary that gives you a very succinct look of it. What it doesn't do is say how the program is being responsive, but it does tell you what all we heard, and we have taken those comments into account in building the policy and the NOFO. Next. And this is for your reading later, kind of, it's a sum up in one slide of what the 78-page document and 4-page summary are. Next. And then once again, just to give kind of a taste of what we'll be doing this summer, those were the engagements I talked about happening in July and August with our webinar series moving into our NOFO webinars. Next, please. So we're very proud of the BRIC website got published or became a real thing somewhere towards the last part of March. So we want to give a lot of attention there. Right now, what's on there is some basic information about the program as well as that stakeholder feedback. I would ask you to bookmark that site. That's where we'll put documents for BRIC as they become final and available, and where we'll be putting information about the BRIC program moving forward. Other information that is important to BRIC, you'll see links there to the Hazard Mitigation Assistance website, which is what BRIC falls under, as well as FEMA's Community Lifelines, benefit cost analysis, and hazard mitigation planning sites. Next, please. I'm sorry, I felt like I had to rush a little bit through the last part of it. This is something I could literally talk all day on. But thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. And once again, there's the website. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Camille, for this incredibly informative presentation. And that was just really chock full of useful information. Once again, before we turn to the respondents, I want to remind folks that we will be sending around a PDF of the slide deck with all of these links that Camille has provided, so you can access more information there. And we are also recording this in case you wanted to review any of the information again. I also failed to note earlier, but we will not have time for questions at the end of the webinar. However, if anyone does have burning questions, we are going to show our contact information on the last slide, and you can feel free to follow up with us, and we'll point you in the right direction for resources to assist you. So now with that, I'm going to turn it over to our respondents, starting with Ben Bolton and Megan Levy, who are representatives of their respective state energy offices and also serve as co-chairs of the NASIO Energy Security Committee.
Thank you very much. If you can, next slide, we'll go to that. All right, thank you very much. I'll be a lot quicker since we are short on time to give everyone an opportunity. I wanted to highlight just two very quick examples that we've done down here in Tennessee, which have proven useful. One is an ArcGIS-based dashboard with data on approved and proposed hazard mitigation projects sorted by county. So it allows us to see a lot of different information breakdown. It's something that our mitigation planning group inside TEMA, the Emergency Management Agency, put together and allows us to sort of see what counties we may need to work on to help, what may be good for some planning assistance and TA. I'm excited to hear about BRIC's FEMA providing TA. But check out the link at the very bottom. It will take you to the landing page for hazard mitigation in the state. And it has project dashboards that will show you how it's breaking down. We think this is already proving to be a helpful tool with hazard mitigation planning across the state, which we are now in day 52 of activation since the tornadoes hit Nashville, and is the longest activation that we think in the entire state, in the state's history. So part of that started with the tornadoes that I wanted to add about water and wastewater efforts is, as we have seen with some of these storms, pumps and lift stations with water and wastewater plants have gone down. Some had generators, some were scrambling to get generators to them. So I've been working with our hazard mitigation planner to, as the response was happening, figure out where those locations were and go ahead and send to her a list of where those where we're tracking those needs, so that they're already identified then when BRIC opportunities come forward and are presented. So it's a great new thing that Carrie Cochran in our hazard mitigation group at FEMA suggested, and she's already been great at helping identify over 20 generator opportunities in the state connected with that effort. So it's a good way to do another thing to add during a response, but already proactively will help you figure out how best to use this mitigation funding to prevent a disaster in the future. And with that, I will turn it over to Megan Levy.
All right, thanks so much, Ben. I really appreciate it. And that's a great example of just proactive data gathering, which I think is a big deal when we're getting ready to apply for these programs. I want to just thank Lynn and David Terry and everyone for setting up this call today, and Camille. It's very, very interesting. And I think this plays right into an effort Wisconsin has going with our State Energy Program Competitive Grant. We've already done a survey of the 72 counties and 11 federally recognized tribes in this state to see what's the status of their ESF-12, their energy emergency plans, and do they specifically identifying critical infrastructure like Ben just mentioned, backup at the wastewater treatment facility, and then exploring strategies beyond the typical backup, which is diesel in our state. We've done some analysis that shows that if just half the state were out of, or one of the largest counties in the state were out of power, we would need more diesel than we have stored on any given day. So I want to put a shout out here to my friends in Kentucky, and there are a lot of other states working on innovative stuff too. So just, I don't want to leave anyone out, but Kentucky has been doing a ton of work, also with ArcGIS, just like Tennessee. And they put together an energy assurance and resilience toolkit, and they're putting that out on the web for everyone to learn from. I think those types of efforts will really, that kind of preparedness plays well into applying for something like BRIC. If we could go to the next slide, just an example of a project that Wisconsin's working on through the SAFER 2 grant, but we've actually put in an advanced assistance application for sort of what Camille was talking about, the planning. We didn't have the funding for the engineering study, and we're looking at a variety of different ways to back up critical infrastructure on the Oneida Nation tribal land that was hit by tornadoes last summer, when we had 16 tornadoes hit across the state and blow down about 200 square acres of trees. So we found during that effort that there was a wastewater treatment plant lift station on the Oneida Nation that does not have backup, similar to what Ben was talking about. So these clean energy microgrids that we're looking at would not only back up critical infrastructure like a data center on the right side and wastewater treatment facility, but there's also a water tower there. So we're looking at, some innovative things. But I liked what Camille said about innovation is what the community says it is, meeting them where they live. So possibly using a pumped hydro up into the water tower, not necessarily saying that backup is always a Tesla Powerwall. So with that, I know our affiliate friends have some questions and some presentations as well, and I just want to thank everyone for having us on this webinar. It's been very, very interesting, and we're super excited about the funding. So thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to Megan and to Ben for those really valuable presentations. And I just want to know, I know we're running long, but we're going to stay on a little bit after the hour just because there is some very important information, and I think this is a really robust discussion. So with that, I am now turning it over to Anna Pavlova at Schneider Electric.
Thank you, Lynn. And you can actually advance to the next slide. So the FEMA here is doing hugely important work, and we just can't wait for the program to start. Schneider Electric traditionally is an energy management and process automation expert globally, but in the US, we are one of the leaders in microgrid solutions, and we've gone through a number of models with our customers. A lot of those customers are infrastructure customers. They're also public towns and public facilities. And we spend a lot of time figuring out what really works for them. And what we found, and our innovation, in addition to the technology innovations that others have discussed, has come from how do these things get financed. And what we discovered is the best way to do this for our customers seems to be through these public-private partnerships. Public-private partnerships is not a new concept on its own, but energy as a service is relatively new, although it is being actively used. And really the point is that a customer may have a building that needs, or a facility or several facilities that needs to have that resilience, but they may not want to own and maintain the actual microgrid. And so they go to companies like Schneider Electric's Alpha Structure to ask for a whole package that comes with financing, with design, build, operate, and maintain. And that is very different from a utility program in the sense that there is no rate basing of that microgrid. There is, it's financed through Alpha Structure. And the way we hope this would work with FEMA, with the BRIC program, is that towns and municipalities we work with would be able to apply for additional funding through FEMA, and then would use our energy as a service model to do the overall project. And I'd like to, next slide please, talk briefly about an example. If you can, yes, thank you. So this is here near me in Montgomery County, Maryland. We would be happy for FEMA to come out if they want to see it, but it's a project for a public safety headquarters of Montgomery County. They cannot lose power for many, many reasons, and it uses energy as a service precisely because the customer did not want to be the one operating. They don't have the budget to be maintaining this microgrid extensively, so they really rely on this energy as a service model, both from financing perspective and from maintaining, designing, operating the microgrid. And lastly, I would say on this slide is that obviously it has a lot of renewables included. That's something that we see more and more so. So there are all sorts of interesting technology things I don't have time to get into now, but it addresses resilience for the client. And if we get to the next slide, please, and that's my final slide, I would just say for BRIC, we do, even though we do these third-party financed projects, we do tap into state resources, and they're relatively modest. Sometimes it's 1/3 of a project, or 1/4 of the cost of the project would be some kind of state money. But now with BRIC, we're hoping that more customers will feel enabled, but we want to make sure that whenever this program sees an application for this kind of a system, that it's allowed to participate. I'm a little bit unclear from current guidelines that I've seen whether the ownership issue is going to be a problem for our model, in the sense, could we use the BRIC funding if it's the P3 that owns the project and the microgrid and not the customer? So we'd love to have that clarification. And obviously, interconnection issues and how do we work with utilities is an important piece. And we hope that FEMA in its technical assistance thinks about how to kind of get utilities to work with these different projects. And obviously, finally, just emphasis on delivering actual projects with BRIC money, as opposed to just getting to feasibility study level and then kind of not sure whether the project's going to happen or not. So getting real value for real customers. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anna. And that was a really helpful overview. And then I'm pleased to turn it over. Let me just change the muting here. Okay. Great. So pleased now to finally turn it over to Manny Perotin at CDM Smith.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, great. All right, thanks, Herb. I'll make this quick. So if you go to the next slide, I'm just going to highlight a couple of examples of mitigation projects that we have experience with. We assist FEMA extensively across some of their hazard mitigation grant programs, including PDM. And these are actually examples of mitigation that was done under their public assistance program following Sandy. Just bring to your attention examples of things that could potentially be also fit under BRIC, and ideally we do this mitigation beforehand and not afterwards, the whole concept. And this is about $1 billion grant under public assistance. About half of that was for repairs, and the other half was for incorporating hazard mitigation, which included requiring over 1,000 miles of their distribution lines being strengthened. That in particular included changing out some of the conductors that they were using, as well as modifying the cross arms, as well as the poles, along with some mitigation being done to their substations. Next slide. This is at NYU Langone Medical Center, the hospital there. Again, this is about, I would say, about a 50-50 split in terms of repairs and mitigation. Most of the mitigation here was done for flood risk reduction, but there was also a component of this that the program was able to partially fund some of the emergency power that in the long term NYU Langone was looking to implement in what they call their new energy building. So again, I'm trying to make this quick. I know we're short on time here. So those are just two examples. And then the final slide, some of you may be not aware of or interested and want to look at is a couple other resources. We already heard the first one is the FEMA loss avoidance study. There's a screenshot of it here. You can look it up, and it highlights a couple of projects that were done in the early 2000s and that were evaluated a few years later to see the return on the investment done in Nebraska and in Kansas. And then we already heard about the BRIC program. In particular, I want to reemphasize that the Federal Register is open for that through the 11th of May. So I encourage you to take a look at that and comment on that. And then finally, if you're not familiar with FEMA's open data, you can go to their website. You can download data from their public assistance program and also their hazard mitigation assistance program under HMA or their hazard mitigation assistance. You can actually look up by what they call a project code. And in this case, I think most of the group here would be interested in the project code 400.1, which has to do with retrofitting or mitigating utilities. And you can see some of the projects that have been funded there. So basic information, a lot of it's just gives you the title and the overall cost of it, but at least gives you a breakdown of some of the things that have been done. So try to keep that short. So Lynn, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Wonderful. That was really helpful, Manny, and I really appreciate you mentioning some of those resources that other project developers could access. Here is the contact information for Lisa, who once again is president of the Business Council for Sustainable Energy, myself from Clean Energy Business Network, and David Terry from the National Association of State Energy Officials. If anyone does have key follow-up questions, please feel free to send us a message and we'll try to get you in touch with the appropriate people or resources to address your questions. I really appreciate everyone taking the time to be on this call today. I wanted to just also flag that the next webinar that will be up in our series will be on May 20th, and we're going to focus on the clean energy economy, looking back at the decade of growth that we had in the 2010s and the first quarter of economic crisis in 2020. So stay tuned for an invitation for that. Thank you very much, everyone.